A fabled king from the Crusades once bunked down with the man England saw as its fiercest foe. Hard to wrap your head around, right? They called him Richard the Lionheart, a man with a lion's courage, blessed by divine will, the king who smashed through Jerusalem's defenses and sent shivers across Europe. But long before he charged into war or pledged his soul to God, Richard shared a bed with France's Philip II, swearing an alliance that nothing could break. That evening, the two mightiest rulers in Europe sat down to feast, clinked their goblets in a toast, and settled onto the same mattress. No clerks, no attendants, just two souls, two towering egos, and a secret that stayed half-hidden. This tale, though, isn't just about one night's rest. It's a mystery that's been murmured about for 800 years. Did England's mightiest warrior king live a life no one dared put a name to? If he did, we might need to rethink what we mean by manliness, heroism, or even what makes a king. But before we tackle that, let me take you to the oddest confession ever whispered in a pope's private chamber, where Richard began to hint at truths nobody dared voice. Ready? This isn't just history, it's a dive into the heart beneath a king's golden armor, a man who never knelt to anyone. Rome, 1195. In the faint glow of a single candle, a cloaked man knelt on cold marble, shadows of carved saints looming like they were eavesdropping. He wasn't some monk or humble pilgrim, he was Richard, England's king, the Lionheart, the scourge of the Saracens, the poster child for Christian knighthood, there to bare his soul. His voice was low, but his words hit like a blade unsheathed. I've sinned with my body. He didn't spell it out, he didn't have to. Those words carried a heavy load, not sins of bloodshed or arrogance, but something carnal. The Pope listened, and history pricked up its ears. Richard's life was a grand show of battlefield victories, with flags hoisted over lands he'd claimed. He was admired, feared, practically worshipped. But under the armor and the Crusader's cross was a man with desires, yearnings no bard ever sang about, no mason ever chiseled into stone. What sins was he talking about? Was it a forbidden fling with a woman during his holy campaign, maybe a servant in Acre's shadows? Or, as whispers have long suggested, was it something bolder, a man, perhaps even a fellow king? Some say he confessed because death had grazed him, a fever from the Third Crusade that nearly took him down. Others think the guilt was rooted deeper, tangled in a truth no crown could hide. The church took his confession but stayed mum on the details, and that silence, that gap in the records, became a breeding ground for rumors. Outside, Vatican bells tolled across the rooftops, but inside, Richard stood, silent as the candle sputtered out. Soon, he'd head back to France, standing shoulder to shoulder with Philip II, the French king who'd once shared not just his table but his bed. Paris, 1187. The Capion court rang with laughter and the clink of spilled wine. Outside, the streets buzzed with the usual Anglo-French tension. Peace was never a sure thing. But inside, a celebration unfolded that turned history on its head. Richard Plantagenet, England's Prince and Duke of Aquitaine, stood side by side with Philip II, France's king, not as foes or rivals, but as allies, brothers, maybe even more, if the whispers held truth. Before the French court, they vowed undying loyalty, ate from the same platter, drank from the same cup, and, as more than one chronicler noted, retreated to the same bed. Yep, the same bed. Now, back in those days, bed-sharing wasn't unheard of in diplomacy. Kings and lords often slept side by side to show trust, proving no knives were hidden under the pillows. But this wasn't some routine gesture, it wasn't just for show. Richard and Philip didn't just share a bed for one night, they did it for months. Chroniclers of the time, like Roger of Hoveden, wrote about it with a hint of unease. They shared the same table, the same dish every day, and at night, their beds stayed close. This wasn't how kings usually acted, not in public, not in the heart of papal Europe, unless they were saying something bold without saying it. Philip was young, sharp, a master of strategy. Richard was fiery, proud, and keenly aware of how things looked. Together, they were a sight, blurring the line between partnership and something deeper. The French court started to buzz. Was this the start of a mighty empire or a scandal even God might struggle to absolve? Their bond paid off politically, briefly shaking Europe's power balance. Even Richard's dad, Henry II, got nervous, accusing Philip of enchanting his son. When that alliance turned against him, Philip backed Richard's rebellion. But the real question lingers, did Richard love Philip? Was this just a pact forged in steel and blood? Or was there something more, something unspeakable back then? Scholars still don't agree. Some say the bed-sharing was all symbolic, others point to their letters, full of intimate tones, or the jealousy that later seeped into Philip's moves, or how fiercely Richard defied his father for Philip. History adores Richard the Lionheart, but it's not sure how to embrace him fully. Chroniclers were clear about his bravery, unwavering about his conquests carved in stone. But when it came to his heart, who he trusted, who he might have loved, their quills paused. That pause is where the story lives. Roger of Hoveden, writing while Richard was still alive, described something that doesn't quite fit the neat picture of medieval manhood. Not just shared beds, but meals from the same dish, days spent together, nights never apart. Another chronicler, Ralph of Dis, a Norman monk, noted their unusual closeness, calling it a bond that stunned even the court. It wasn't just politics, wasn't just brotherly, it was, in their words, singular. Now, the Middle Ages weren't like today. Men could be close, even physically, without it meaning what we might think. Brothers kissed, knights cried in each other's arms, sharing a bed wasn't always a scandal. But this was no ordinary knightly bond. These were two kings, two pillars of Christian manhood and power, choosing night after night to be seen in the soft flicker of candlelight behind the same curtains. Their closeness was so bold, so public, it sparked unease even in their own courts. Henry II, Richard's father, accused Philip of casting a spell over his son. One French chronicler called their bond a flame too fierce to endure. Was it just a clever alliance, a cunning web of politics, or something deeper, riskier, and truer? Picture two kings, tucked under a silken canopy, trading battle plans over bites of roasted pheasant. One flashes a grin, the other's gaze lingers, eyes darker than the wine in their cups. The room goes quiet, not from their words, but from the weight of what they leave unsaid. Today's scholars wrestle with it. Was this a brotherly bond, forged in the heat of war and politics, or something closer to love, stepping softly into forbidden territory? Truth is, we don't have their private letters or a key to that bedchamber. But we've got the ripples they caused, and sometimes that's louder than words. When powerful men stir up fear like this, it's usually because they've crossed a line. Maybe the line wasn't in the bed itself, but in the hearts of those watching, scared that love could shake the foundations of kingdoms. He wore a crown, led armies across continents, toppled fortresses, crossed scorching deserts, and etched his name into history's bones. But Richard the Lionheart, England's king and Christendom's hero, left no heir, not a single child, not even a rumor of one. In 1191, under the blazing sun of the Crusades, he wed Berengaria of Navarre. It was a proper royal match, well-timed, politically tidy, all the right boxes checked. She arrived draped in white silk, he stood tall in shining armor. Yet their marriage felt more like a signed treaty than a heartfelt vow. They didn't even share their wedding night. Most royal couples, even those bound by duty over love, did their part. Heirs weren't optional, dynasties hung on them. But Richard and Berengaria spent most of their marriage apart. She barely saw him, he never sought her out. England never welcomed a prince from their king. Chroniclers took note and whispers spread. Was he barren? Was it a calculated choice? Or was it something sinful? The lack of heirs wasn't just a personal puzzle, it was a political gamble. Richard's younger brother, John, cunning and hungry, lurked in the shadows. No clear successor meant chaos for the Plantagenet line after Richard's death. Yet Richard seemed unbothered, no mistresses, no hidden children, no secret heirs tucked away in rural castles. Nothing. Just Berengaria, alone, fading into the background. Some say Richard was married to war itself, that the battlefield was his true love, his victories his lasting legacy. Others suspect something quieter, more personal was at play, that he wed because duty demanded it, ruled because he had to, but his heart answered to someone else. In that silence, he might have said more than history's pages ever could. He was the living symbol of holy war, Christendom's lion, storming Acre's gates, standing atop mounds of fallen foes, raising his sword not for fame but for God. Richard the Lionheart was a crusader through and through, yet he might have carried into battle a secret that clashed with the cross he wore. The church called him their champion, excommunicated him, then forgave him, condemned him, then lifted him up. But beneath that sacred armor was a man who'd knelt before the Pope, confessing sins of the body. Many now believe those sins weren't about women at all. There's a tightrope between faith and self, thinner for kings than most. How did Richard balance the cross on his chest with desires the church had no room for? Historians try to brush it off. Some say his confession was just about general lust, a slip-up during his campaigns. Others figure political pressures pushed him to cleanse his soul to shore up his royal legitimacy. But what if it was honest? What if the man leading God's armies carried the weight of loving someone he shouldn't? Richard's legend was shaped by men who needed heroes, not complications. But it's the contradictions that make a man real. He was a warrior, a king. He might have also loved men. Yet somehow Christendom still chose him as its blade. This isn't just about one guy. It's about how history handles difference, how it strips tenderness from tough men, how it rewrites stories to make saints fit neatly. Sometimes, though, a life's holiness comes not from being pure, but from wrestling to live true within its chains. Before he wore a crown, before he swung a sword in the Holy Land or stood beside a foreign king in the glow of candlelight, Richard was just the son of a woman who'd already ruled empires. Eleanor of Aquitaine was a force like no other, maybe in any era. She'd worn 2 crowns, raised 10 kids, endured imprisonment, and outsmarted kings. She'd ridden into battle, sparred with bishops, and once swayed a whole court into war. If power took human form in the 12th century, it was her. And if anyone saw through the shine of her son's golden armor, it was Eleanor. She'd lived long enough to know kings didn't always marry for love. She hadn't. She understood desire could be perilous, but denying it could be deadly. She knew her son better than anyone. When Richard's letters to Philip of France carried a warmth beyond diplomacy, Eleanor didn't blink. When whispers from Paris hinted the 2 kings shared more than strategy and wine, she heard them but held her tongue. She didn't need proof. She'd seen too much of the world to demand it. Years earlier, Eleanor had stood by her uncle in Antioch, facing the same kind of rumors now trailing her son. She'd known what it was to crave beyond the walls of duty, and she'd paid the price for it. So when Richard prepared to marry Berengaria, a woman he'd barely see again, Eleanor handled the details. She settled the dowry, planned the ceremony, and did what queens do. But she didn't expect the marriage to mean much. She knew it was just a mask, a shield between Richard and a world that wouldn't accept his truth. Eleanor guarded more than her son's crown. She protected the parts of him that could be whole, not just as a warrior or king, but as a man who might have loved in a way the church couldn't sanctify. She never spoke of what she likely knew, but she didn't have to. Her silence was a fortress. Her steady gaze was shield enough. Her legacy, rarely put this way, might be that she was the first to truly see Richard without asking questions. History often overlooks women who hold secrets, but Eleanor didn't forget a thing. She remembered it all, and she might have been the only one who saw Richard not as the Lionheart, but as her son. A sword can do more than cut flesh. In the right hands, it can slice away the softer parts of a story, leaving only the sharp edge behind. That's what happened to Richard the Lionheart. When medieval scribes penned their chronicles, they kept the strange lines. Richard and Philip shared one bed. Roger of Hoveden wrote, unsure or unwilling to explain why. Those old parchments held on their faded words, waiting for later eyes to find them. But then the blade of censorship got to work. Victorian scholars, tidying up Richard's legend for proper society, found those lines unsettling. They smoothed them out, and in an 1841 biography, Bedfellow got swapped for a tidy dash, a neat scar where truth once stood. The reader glides past the blank space, none the wiser. And so, from parlors to schoolrooms, that dash became gospel. Heroes had to be straightforward, kings, above all, had to fit a narrow mold. Silence spreads easily. By the time Hollywood cast Richard in The Crusades in 1935, the script had no space for tender letters to a French king or for an English queen left with an empty cradle. It called for fanfares, not hidden truths, a silver screen Lionheart charging through Palestine, glowing and simple, the exact hero amid 20th century crowd wanted. But cameras can't drown out what archives murmur. Step into the British Library today and ask for Cotton MS Vespasian A6 F 19V. Run your fingers gently over the vellum, you'll feel a roughness where medieval ink once traced a bond too close for mere politics. Someone, long after, scraped it away with a penknife. Under the right light, you can still catch the faint outline of those words, like a wound that never fully healed. That knife left nothing clear to read, but it left plenty to wonder about. Erasure doesn't stop at one edge. In classical history, Alexander rides without Hephaestion's affection. In American Tales, Lincoln shares a cramped boarding house bed with Joshua Speed only because rooms were tight. Each excuse gets passed down like a well-worn recipe for denial, tweaked, warmed over, fed to the next generation. What's lost when we buy it? We lose Richard's quiet nights on crusade, penning letters to a man who once lay beside him. We lose Philip's bitterness when politics overtook their private vows. We lose Berengaria's silent sorrow, waiting in Aquitaine for a husband who'd never come back to her heart or her bed. It's not just rumors we lose, it's the human threads that history really hangs on. Yet silence is never airtight. It hums like a bell struck with the shape of what's gone. Modern scholars follow that hum, queer readers catch its echo. Filmmakers, braver now, let a glance linger between Richard and Philip, a subtle strain in a spoken line. Each gesture brings back a piece the blade cut away, and the legend, shaky, alive, starts to breathe in a new way. So the question isn't just whether Richard loved one man, or two, or none at all. The real question is, why were we taught to never ask? Whose kingdom was protected by keeping a king's pillow cold and lonely in the records? Who gains when courage is stripped of complexity, when power is cut off from intimacy? 1,000 years back, a chronicler set down the truth in plain Latin. A century ago, an editor swapped it for a dash. Today, we hold the manuscript to the light and see the lost words flicker like coals. The sword's silence is fading. History isn't etched in stone, it's reshaped, retold, replayed, each generation molding legends to reflect itself. Richard the Lionheart, once immortalized in stained glass and royal tapestries, has lived another life far from dusty scrolls. He strode across movie sets, stood under stage lights, and come alive through storytellers bold enough to ask, what if the whispers were true? In 1935, Hollywood gave us a Richard clad in white armor, radiating holy virtue. Cecil B. DeMille's The Crusades painted him as a pure warrior fighting foes abroad and duty at home. There was no space for nuance, no hint of shared beds or private notes. That Richard was polished, noble, and squarely heterosexual, no trace of a man who confessed bodily sins or called another king his beloved. But the tale started to shift. In 1968, The Lion in Winter gave us a different Richard, bruised, wary, and layered. Anthony Hopkins played him not as a saintly knight, but as a son scarred by politics and, maybe, something more personal. In a hushed moment with his mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, he admits to loving someone once. He doesn't name them, he doesn't need to. The silence says it all. By 1991, when Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves hit screens, Richard was myth again, this time as Sean Connery, riding in briefly, flashing a kind smile, blessing a wedding, and saying little else. His legacy was grand, clean, almost godly. But between these poles, the mute icon and the wounded son, a new space opened. Modern retellings, especially in theater and indie films, dare to voice what old chronicles only hinted at. They place Richard and Philip side by side, not just as allies, but as lovers. They let the bed-sharing carry feeling, not just politics. Some frame Richard's marriage to Berengaria as a mask. Others show Eleanor as the knowing guardian of a son whose private life was too risky to name. Beyond the screen, in essays, talks, and forums, LGBTQ historians are reclaiming Richard not as fact, but as potential. They don't claim he was definitely gay, they say it's fair to wonder, fair to read the texts anew, fair to picture a king whose bravery included loving someone history wouldn't endorse. Somewhere in a small London theater, a play reimagines the Crusades, not through battles, but through love letters between two kings. The audience holds its breath as Richard kneels by a dying Philip, murmuring words he never dared put to paper. Behind them, projections flash, real quotes from medieval scribes preserved through time. Pop culture hasn't replaced history, it's helped fill it out. It gives us a Lionheart who bleeds, doubts, desires, and maybe carried more than a sword into battle, perhaps a secret, perhaps a loss. Picture it differently. No scribe scratches out the line, no penknife scars the vellum. The Latin stands untouched, and at night their beds did not divide them. Those words travel whole through the ages, printed in every chronicle, taught in every school, echoed from church to tavern until they're just common knowledge. What changes then? First, the battlefield shifts. Imagine Richard and Philip riding side by side at the siege of Acre, not just allies out of need, but partners whose shared pulse beats beneath their armor. England's banner snaps in the desert breeze next to France's fleur-de-lis, and the soldiers catch something striking in that pairing, a bond fiercer than rivalry, richer than any treaty. Would they have fought harder, knowing their leaders poured their hearts out for each other as much as for God? Or would murmurs of forbidden love have sapped the army's strength? History doesn't hand us the answer, but it leaves the door open to ask. Then there's the court. A queen without children isn't a puzzle anymore, but a choice, Berengaria, respected for diplomacy while the king's heart belongs elsewhere. Eleanor of Aquitaine doesn't have to hide secrets in shadows and flame, she might lift a glass instead, proclaiming that courage comes in many forms. A mother's love burns just as strong when it's rooted in truth. What if medieval Europe, seeing its greatest warrior unashamed, realized that manhood could bend without breaking, that a sword stays sharp even when the hand wielding it holds tenderness for another man? 1,000 years on, the stories we inherit shift. Boys flipping through history books find notes that speak plainly of desire, learning that bravery isn't just for the straight. Girls see a world where power is shaped, not dictated, where bonds of the heart reshape kingdoms as much as bonds of blood. A queer reader, once hunting for scraps, now finds a hero whose heartbeat mirrors their own. The Lionheart becomes evidence that greatness comes from daring, not from fitting in. Does it matter if the love was real? Absolutely, because possibility rewrites memory. When we allow that queerness might have existed, we bring depth back to the tale. We pull Richard down from his marble pedestal and let him live again, a man of faith and hunger, of fierce talent and quiet yearning. His triumphs don't fade, they gain layers. His flaws don't disappear, they turn human instead of mythic. And heroism itself shifts, embracing a warrior who could conquer cities by day and pen tender promises by night. So let the question linger, not as a jab, but as an open door. What if he loved him? What other tales of victory and vulnerability, belief and desire, lie hidden in the lines of dusty chronicles? Somewhere, tucked in the folds of time, between truth and legend, beneath the weight of armor and the hush of velvet curtains, there's a bed. It stood in a Paris palace, maybe a Rouen stronghold, or perhaps only in a monk's scribbled margin, in the memory of a long-gone servant, or in the smoldering silence that follows great secrets. But that bed endures, not as a relic, but as a symbol, not just of two kings who might have shared it, but of the questions that refused to stay buried. Richard the Lionheart fell in 1199, struck by a crossbow bolt while besieging a minor castle. It wasn't a grand battlefield or a clash of empires, just another wave in the tide of ambition. He left no son, no written confession, no heir to carry his line, only pieces. A marriage without warmth, a mother who spoke little and burned much, and a French king who grieved him in private, though no public words marked his passing. Yet his legend endured. It lived in every statue raised without a heart. It lived in textbooks that lauded his crusades but skipped his confessions. It lived in the silence of historians who knew but held back. It lived in the glances traded by actors playing Richard and Philip on stages too cautious to name what the script only suggests. And it still lives. This isn't just Richard's tale. It belongs to every truth etched too faintly, every love written in vanishing ink, every legacy shaped by what couldn't be spoken aloud. Because history isn't just what happened, it's what we choose to recall. And sometimes recalling is the boldest act of all. So let that bed stand, not as gossip, but as proof. Let it remind us that greatness wears many faces, and some of the bravest hearts beat in bodies that didn't fit their era's mold. Richard was a warrior, a king, a crusader, and maybe he was also a man who loved. The chronicles may never spell out the full truth, but the legacy, whispered from scribe to screen, keeps breathing.